All right, great. Again, just to help save some time and make sure that Alex has the fullest use of his time that he's allotted today, I'm going to run through some of our technical web help just to make sure that you've got your WebEx working as you are joining our event today. As always, don't worry that you cannot unmute or you cannot show your video. That is on purpose. Sometimes these events have over 1,000 attendees, and we want to make sure that we're giving our speaker the full capacity to present with us. Hopefully you can hear us. You can see my mouth moving and you can hear our audio. If you are still having issues hearing your audio, you're going to want to take a screenshot real fast of this screen and check out that audio connection up at the top of your WebEx browser screen. So again, that audio settings, make sure that your speakers are turned on, make sure they're plugged in. That was an issue we've had before, and get yourself ready to listen. As always, WebEx has an additional link for Help Center phone number and an FAQ page that has a wealth of resources as well. We are going to be using chat today, and if you have not already, feel free to introduce yourself in chat. Our chat is open for on-topic professional discussion. Please use full and clear sentences for your questions. And please make sure that you've selected to everyone in your chat. That ensures that we all have a community conversation in that chat. Again, respectful and professional as this is a professional Texas Master Naturalist event. And then finally, just to help summarize our webinar etiquette before we get started with Alex as he's getting joined. Again, as a reminder, our attendees are not able to unmute during our WebEx event. Please use your chat for your questions. The chat is specifically for on-topic discussion only. All comments and questions in the chat room, please use them in full sentences. Don't use acronyms. That helps us to be able to verbally ask our speaker the questions when it's time to ask those questions. We are going to be running this session for right at 1 hour today. If you are a Texas Master Naturalist, you can log this hour as a AT hour, and please communicate with your chapter's VMS admin if you have issues. Again, if you are experiencing additional issues with your WebEx, you can refer to our WebEx help guide, which is on our website. So I'm still getting a message from Alex that he is having some issues. He said that WebEx is freezing on his browser, and he should be on in just a moment. So hang tight with us for just another minute while Alex joins us, and then we'll get started.
While we're waiting, would you like to use some of the time to introduce him?
Let's hang tight and get him online before we do the introductions. Okay, let me send him another. Michelle, since you're host, on the top ribbon, you should have a participants and an invite link. Will you please remind or invite Alex one more time?
It's done.
All right. He just says that he has the link now and he's attempting to join. So here we go. Thank you guys so much for your patience. Again, we ran the tech check, but it never fails. Your computer decides, no, today's not your day.
I made it. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Hey y'all. That was so strange. I've been trying since like 11:55 and my computer was freezing. Anyway.
We'll
Hello.
just blame it on the weather. It's been raining all over Texas.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, it has been so strange. Such a strange year. So I appreciate everyone making time and space. So Mary, real quick, had you did like I don't know what you've covered,
Yeah,
like
so
10
we've
minutes while
already
you're all
done the
waiting.
tech check. We've
Okay.
done the tech check. We've done the rain check to see
Oh,
who's got rain and who's not got rain.
okay.
And Michelle was just about to introduce you, and then we're going to hand it right to you. So you've got perfect timing.
Awesome. Great.
All right, you ready for me to tell all your good things?
No pressure, but go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm so excited, and even more so excited now that we're able to get Alex through the tech issues this morning, or this afternoon, and that he's able to join us today. Alex Bailey is the founder and board president of Black Outside. His love for the outdoors started as a summer camp counselor after spending 3 summers working at one of the premier summer overnight camps for boys in the country. He witnessed the transformative power of the outdoors. Alex soon joined Teach for America and served as a classroom teacher for 4 years and later became an instructional coach with Teach for America in San Antonio. Throughout his experience in both the classroom and as an instructional coach, he witnessed the inequity in outdoor programming for Black youth, and here at home in San Antonio, within Texas. In 2018 and 19, he embarked on a journey to observe and shadow more than 10 summer camps across the country to better understand the impact outdoor programming has had on youth in order to build a culturally relevant program in the city of San Antonio. In January of 2019, Alex, alongside the community of passionate education advocates, founded Black Outside Incorporated, with a passion for expanding outdoor opportunities for more Black youth across Central Texas. In his role as board president, Alex oversees sponsorships and brand partnerships, in addition to volunteering his time with programming. He currently serves as the senior director of the H.E.B. Butt Foundation Outdoor School, and he's a proud fellow of Wild Gift and a 2019 TEDx San Antonio speaker. And so here today to tell us about Black Outside and Allyship is Alex Bailey.
Awesome. Can y'all hear me okay? Pretty well? Okay, good. I saw in the chat that there's a someone said, "Woo, wild gift." I don't know if that's a wild gift alum. We're a very small community. But that's super awesome, Sarah. So I'm gonna get ready to share my screen. So I think that's the only small thing I'll need to get the ability to do real quick. But as I do that, thank you. So some people are saying welcome. I feel so affirmed virtually. This is great. So, yeah, if y'all could, if you're open to it, I mean, if it's everyone, that would be great. But if not, yeah, just a few of y'all. I'd love to hear where y'all are like WebExing in from. Everybody says Zooming, but WebExing in from. What part of Texas are y'all in? That would kind of be helpful as a touch point for me throughout the session. All right, that's Cedar Point, Fort Worth, San Angelo, a lot of Austin, Sugar Land. Okay, Elgin. I used to teach in Manor. All right, Kerrville. All right, I know that pretty well. Alpine, Houston. All right, there we go. All right, Bastrop, Cibolo, San Antonio. Okay, right down near me, Wichita Falls, Lexington. All right, Round Rock. Awesome. Missouri City, Texas. Okay, awesome. Lockhart barbecue capital. There we go. All right. All right, awesome. Okay, good. Plano. Wow. Okay, Georgetown, great. West. Okay, Kansas, New Braunfels, great. This is all super helpful for me. Denton, okay. Caw is that my friend went to UNT. So there we go. All right, great. I have land acknowledgement there. That's beautiful. Liberty, Texas. That's really great. Awesome. Houston, great. This is super helpful for me to kind of have context on where people are coming from. Garland, awesome, awesome. San Marcos, great. Some tubing coming up, tubing season. Awesome. Thank y'all so much for that. Thank y'all so much. So let me go ahead and share my screen as y'all finish naming where y'all are zooming in or WebExing in from. I'm so used to saying Zoom, so apologies. Hope no one working for WebEx is on this call. And then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. And work for me. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. Let me ask the magic question of 2020 and now 2021. Can everyone see my screen? Yes. Can I get a one yes?
Yes.
Hey, there we go. Perfect. All right, good, good. All right, I am so excited to chat with y'all. Obviously, we're a little bit behind time, so I may just be kind of flying through some parts just to make sure we have plenty of time and space to discuss. But I'm super excited for y'all to talk about allyship and think about what that means to engage BIPOC. And when we say BIPOC, that means Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So people of color would include anyone of Asian descent or AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander, or our Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx communities here in Texas also. So I know that word's been thrown around a lot, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Like, what is that BIPOC word, right? So Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, which we have here in Texas. As I said, my name's Alex. Y'all got the fun introduction about my background. I consider myself a lifelong camp counselor. That was actually my entry point to the outdoors is unique. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But my grandfather was a gardener, so that he really just had this intimate knowledge of the natural world. He was one of those people, y'all, that you would walk around and he would just be like, this plant, this tree, this tree. Does that sound familiar, master naturalist? Right? So I always joke that he was a master naturalist himself, having been a gardener at the local botanical garden in Mansfield, Ohio. If there's any Ohioans or Buckeyes on the call, that's where I'm originally from. And so he really instilled this, showed me what this love of the outdoors could look like. But being a camp counselor really instilled it in me and showed me the power that has on you. I.O. Sarah. That's an Ohio joke. So yeah, and so I'm super honored to be with y'all today. So what we're going to be doing just for our time together is we're going to examine a little bit of our own outdoor experiences. We're going to participate in an activity called Draw Your World. So in a second, if you have a piece of paper or a pen near you, a notebook, or if you want to just take notes on your phone or your computer, some of y'all Mac folks can have your iNotes up. We'll do a fun little engaging activity. And then we're going to explore this framework called Liberatory Consciousness. I know that's a lot of syllables there. So just I would say that that's the official name of the framework, but it's pretty simple stuff. And so I just want to name that I think sometimes when in the world of equity talk, there's all these big words. And we're just going to break it down together and think about what this looks like in the outdoors. And part of that tail end is going to be talking about allyship. And at the end, we're going to examine this idea of taking and making space, which we want to dive into. So that's our hopes for our time together. So real quick, I obviously got to shout out our amazing organization and show y'all cute pictures of kids, right? It's part of my work. And so, like I said, I'm the board president and founder of an amazing organization, Black Outside. For quick context, we are an umbrella organization. So what that means is we're different from your Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, which are amazing organizations too. We don't have one set of Black Outside youth. We're an umbrella organization with 3 different programs. So we have a program where we partner with 100 Black men here in San Antonio and provide our Black boys with deep wilderness experiences called the Brotherhood Collective. We also have a year-round program called the Charles Roundtree Bloom Project. And that is an outdoor healing justice program for youth of incarcerated families or caregivers. And then we have an amazing summer camp. I'm going to shout them out real quick because they're gearing up for the summer, Camp Founder Girls. So 2 of those programs you can find on Instagram, Facebook, and follow along there. One quick note about Camp Founder Girls that I always like to shout out is that Camp Founder Girls was America's first historically Black summer camp for girls. And it started in San Antonio in 1924, as you can see from our girls' shirts. And then our organization revived or resurrected that program in 2019. It ceased operations in the 1960s. So that's really one of our proud hallmark programs. And this summer, we're going to have 85 girls attend camp, 20 of which are coming from outside the state of Texas. So whoop, whoop, shout out to that. Send light to our camp counselors as they're figuring out all the COVID plans with that. But we're super excited. So that's a little bit of context on our organization. And then before we jump into the Draw Your World activity that I want to do, I want to talk a little bit about our why real quick, why I started this organization, because I get these questions a lot. Unfortunately, and just to ground us in some statistics, right? Here in our home state of Texas, only 1% of Texas state park participants identify as Black or African American. So when I go to a park, I mean, it is very rare that I ever see someone that looks like me, right? It's very rare I ever see someone that looks like me. I was fortunate the last trip we took was to Lost Maples, and there was 2 Black families there, and it was funny. We were on the trail, and we all kind of looked at each other like, wait a second. Oh, we're both here. That's great, right? But even on all of our trips that we've took to state parks for our youth, it's rare that we've ever seen other people that look like us. So that's a statistic that we hope to play a small role, right, or a bigger role in moving the needle on in our home state of Texas together, right? And we're going to need folks like you to help us to do that, right? Which is why I'm engaging in this session. For some of our former summer camp counselors, if there's any on the call, give it a shout out in the chat, right? Only 4% of summer campers identify as Black or African American. So that's another way as we think about entry points into the outdoors, right? Summer camp is a huge entry point for many youth, and only 1 out of every 25 identifies Black or African American. Again, for us, this is almost an injustice, right? And for us, we hope to move the needle on that also through our summer camping program. And then nationally, right? I'm sure many of y'all have been to Big Bend, right? And thinking about national parks, only 7% of national park participants identify as Black or African American. And so you think about that number, which is like higher than the others, which is great. But then you also think about some of the locations of national parks, like in other states, that are a little bit more approximate to urban areas where you might find more communities of color. And so our hope for Black Outside is that we're able to move the needle on some of these numbers and plant seeds with our youth so that they one day can be the adults that are hoping to change these numbers with their families. So one big thing is our mission, just so you know, is to reconnect Black youth to the outdoors. We believe that Black people have been in the outdoors for hundreds of years, right? We think about Harriet Tubman. We think about the Buffalo Soldiers. We even think about some of the writings, if any of literature folks. Toni Morrison is a famous Black woman who's an author. Maya Angelou wrote a lot about the outdoors. And we build on that history in order to connect our youth. So we always tell our youth, do not fall for the trap that Black people don't go outside. Like, that is not true, right? And our running joke with our organization, with our kids, is that, hey, how do you think Harriet Tubman did all the things that she did? She didn't pick her youth up or the people up in Honda Civics and vans and said, let's go, right? She had to use the natural world around her. So I did want to ground us in those statistics before we jump in as just a food for thought. So as you think about, like, go through the session, I think I want to push y'all to think about some of the whys, right, of why these numbers exist. And I already see some people in the chat kind of thinking and processing that. All right. So yeah, by this point, I've been yapping away for the last 3.5 minutes, right? And I hope at that point you've scrambled and found a piece of paper or a pen, or if you want to use your phone or notebook or anything near you to participate in this first activity called Draw Your World. Draw Your World. So what we're going to do is, just for framing for the activity, is I'm going to ask you just a few questions, right? And I want you to literally either draw it out, you can list it out, right? And just think of the things that first pop into your head when you hear that, okay? So think of the things that first pop in your head. So I've had some folks who participate who are artists who draw things out. They're like drawing. I'm a list person, so totally feel free to definitely list some things out. as you go along. Okay. So what's going to happen is I'm going to be asking the questions, and I'll give you about 30. I usually give 60 seconds. I'm going to name because we're a little behind. I'm going to do about 35 seconds to give you some time to just sketch something out real quick or draw what comes to mind with these questions. All right, draw what comes to mind with these questions. And I'm going to ask you about 4 of them. So this will be about a 3.5, 4-minute exercise. And then if you're open in the chat, we'll have some of y'all feel free to kind of type in the chat what were some things that popped up. All right, what were some things that pop up? So give me 1 second. I'm going to prep my timer. And then if y'all could just go ahead and get your pens ready, your notebooks ready, whatever it is, and then we'll jump in. Okay. All right. Are y'all ready? Thumbs up. Sensing a thumbs up. Great. Okay. So the first question I'll have y'all do is I want you to answer the question or draw out the question. All right. Who are you? Who are you? All right. I'll give you 35 seconds to do that. All right. Who are you? And you can answer that in any way you want. All right. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds for that. Okay. Who are you? Great. All right. Now I'm going to ask you this question. Where are you? Now, obviously there's a city, but I would love to push you to describe a little bit more about like where some of the whereabouts when you think about where and look around you. It could be a physical space, it could be kind of a mental space, but where are you? Where's your head at or where's your body at? What's the feeling around you? Okay. Where are you right in this moment? Where are you? All right, so that's our 10-second warning. Okay. All right. Go ahead and wrap that up. Again, it could just be a quick list. It could be an actual little quick sketch. All right, we have 2 more questions. All right. The second to last question I want to ask you is what are your passions? Okay. What are your passions or what are the things that you love? What are your passions or what are the things that you love? All right. 35 seconds. What are your passions or what are the things that you love? All right, 10 seconds, kind of wrap up. What are your passions? What are the things that you love? All right, great. Okay, and the last one I'm actually going to give you a full minute for. I'm going to give you a full minute for this last one. The last big question I want to ask you is if you feel touched and moved to, if you're an artist, you can definitely do this and actually draw it. Or, like, obviously, feel free to just put a list out. I want you to draw your world. Draw your world. All right. Any way or whatever pops up first in your head. Draw your world. All right, go ahead and kind of finish up your mini quick drawing, quick sketch, or whatever came to mind. All right. And as you finish that, if you could, just go ahead and set that to the side or somewhere near you that you can pull up. We're gonna, in the like late third quarter, I'm a former football guy, late third quarter of the session, we're gonna come back to that and I'm gonna have you do a little bit of sharing, all right? So just put that to the side. Thank y'all so much for that, for accepting that invitation to participate in that activity, all right? So we'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and continue. So really quickly, I'm going to be using a few terms during this. And I think it's important, gosh, in our world, especially in our country right now, let's be real, y'all. Like, I just think there's like people say one word and I think they say a word and might mean one thing, and then another person hears the word, it might mean something else. So I do firmly believe whenever I'm facilitating sessions, at least I like to align on terms and share like, hey, when I say this word, this is what I mean. Okay. At least me personally, not saying this is the absolute definition of the word, but at least in my personal kind of lexicon or definition, this is what I mean by that. So there's two words that you're going to hear me use, that's equity and inclusion, a little interchangeably throughout this. So I'm just going to give you kind of like my broad definition, and then we're going to jump into the actual like meat of the session. All right. So one big thing is like equity, you're going to hear me say, and I think one big piece I want to emphasize for y'all is like, you've probably heard this in previous sessions, so some of y'all might be like, yeah, I know this, right? Which is great, but I just want to make sure we're all aligned. When I say equity, I'm thinking about like the picture here to the right, right? Not versus the picture to the left. Now, I really like this picture. There's a better picture that, to be honest, I couldn't find. I always like keep forgetting to save it because the only thing I don't like about this picture is the fact that like, everyone's like different sizes, right? And there's a better picture where like everyone's the same size, but you can see it's just like it's like on a hill. But all that to say, when I say equity, right, I think about the idea that like some folks may need, or some communities, our kids, our youth, our families may need more resources to equal the playing field, or be able to see, or be able to even participate in outdoor activities. Okay. So again, how does that's more of a broader question, right, to ask, but thinking about like how's programming impacting the most vulnerable or the most marginalized in our community. So sometimes you can think from equity around like race, right, which we'll talk about. But also it's like it can be along class for some of y'all's folks, right? It can be along lines of gender, right? It could be along lines of sexual orientation, right? And so when think about equity lens, there's definitely going to be different barriers to people being able to see, right, the playing field on the same level. Okay. So that's one thing we'll talk about is equity. And when I mention that word, yes. And then inclusion. All right. This is a big power word that obviously in the last year has been thrown around a lot. Or for some of y'all's like full-time companies or jobs, you may hear this word like inclusion being thrown around. And I love this question that it asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? All right. Is it feel like safe for everyone to be along? The other thing you'll notice here in the middle is this word centering, right? And so when we say centering, at least when our organization says centering, we think about the idea of like, when we're creating programming, like who's like the first or second like kid that we think of, right? And so for us, for Black Outside, one thing we try to do is we center Black youth, right? We've served youth of all races, right? But one thing we do is, and we care about youth of all races clearly, right? But one difference is it's rare for some of the programs that I've shadowed is that they center or like think about the Black youth experience. So we're going to come back to that and what that means, our perfect example of that. But centering means like thinking about like who's kind of at the center. And a lot of times it's like it might be kids who've already had the experience of the outdoors, or it might be like the majority population. But I push a lot of programs to think about if you move the center to kids that are kind of on the margins, or kids that like your 2 or 3 kids that might identify as Asian or Pacific Islander, right? And they're having a phenomenal experience in your program, that's going to like actually amplify the experience for others. Because then we know like if the most marginalized of the kids that feel most vulnerable or the most afraid, if they feel safe, then a lot of the other kids are going to feel even more safe. So that's another word we think about is inclusion. All right, so those are 2 definitions you're going to hear me throw out throughout this. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the liberatory consciousness. We'll kind of fly through this in the next 5 minutes. And this is more, I'm very much a question asker. I'm a list person. I ask a lot of questions in an inquisitive way. I'm always like reflecting on questions. And so what I frame this around is some questions to ask. So you'll heard like the buzzword, right, is allyship, right? How can you be an ally to different communities? And I want to step back. It's easy to think about race. Like if you identify as white, right? Then like it's like, okay, how can I be an ally to the Black community near me? If you're in Dallas or Houston, right? Some of our folks are even Austin. Or how can I be an ally, right? To the Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx community, right? And so even for me, as like I identify as a Black male, right? I think a lot about like how am I also an ally to women of color, right? In this work in the outdoors, because we know that they have a different experience than what I have experienced. So we're going to get to that point of allyship, but before I get there, right, there are some questions that I need to ask myself before I get there, because I think what happens a lot of times is people just jump. You like read that one article, or you see that one documentary, or you see that one cool post on social media or someone's cool profile, and you're like, oh my gosh, I am like, how do we fix this issue right now? And like, I want to be an ally. And let me just jump into the work. My big push to a lot of folks is that like there's steps before you get to that process that you need to think about before just kind of jumping in and engaging with like communities along lines of difference. And when we say lines of difference, again, gender, race, sexual orientation, all those different parts of our identity. So I think the first step that I think about, and I refine these questions to include the outdoors, because obviously we all love the outdoors, especially y'all are master naturalists, right? Is awareness, right? And so like, what inequities or differences in outdoor experiences are you aware of in your community? And I think that's the first step, right? And so some of that happens, like I talked about, like that awareness step is usually like the thing that happens first, and then people jump from awareness to allyship, and we'll talk about the two things in the middle. So again, like I think the first step is awareness and making yourself aware, and also putting yourself in places, in spaces to make yourself aware. So what I think about a lot of times with awareness is like, who are you reading about, or who are you reading from, right? Who are the people that you might follow if you're on Instagram or Facebook, right? That might help you become more aware of different experiences other than your own, right? Other than your own, right? One example that I'll name for myself is like, I follow a lot of men, right, on Instagram. And it wasn't until last summer, one of my friends, our executive director, she was like, how many Black women do you follow? And I was like, dang, I only follow like 4. So I really did an intentional job. I'm not the best at this, right? But intentional job of like just simply following more people and listening, right? And hearing the perspective of women of color was really helpful for me to think about how I can become a better ally, especially for our young girls. Yeah. Tiara, I actually know you. Hey, Tiara. Oh, that's funny. And then so the next step is analysis. So this is like the self-reflective piece that I think is very important before jumping into allyship, right? Like it's like taking a step back to be like, okay, before I just jump in and be like, I want an ally, I'm going to email this program and ask how I can just help, right? I think it's taking a step back and asking like, what actions, mindsets need to shift, right? So example is like one concrete example that I named, right, is like, my colleague Angelica Holmes, executive director, she kind of like tongue in cheek in a way said like, how many Black women do you follow on your Instagram feed? And I was like, dang. So then my analysis piece was like, I actually took the time to like look through my feed, right? So I was like, oh, that's like a shift I need to make, and kind of taking the time to self-reflect, or even looking back at like, I read a lot of articles from Outside Magazine. How many of them centered like women of color in their experience, right? So that's like an analysis piece. And so this can be along lines of class or anything, or just like doing some digging around where are the parks, right, located in your city. Wait a second, I know here in San Antonio, right, some of our nicest parks are not the most approximate to our Black neighborhoods, our historically Black neighborhoods, right? We have a beautiful Martin Luther King Park, but it is nowhere near as nice as like McAllister Park on the northeast side of our city. So that's another example. I'm sure my person from Cibolo can attest to some of that on this call. The next piece is thinking about action, right? So now what's the action steps I'm going to take? I'm narrating that to y'all as an example. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to now commit to like following, right? I'm going to commit to following more Black women in the outdoors on my Instagram feed, right? Or I'm going to commit to doing a little bit more reading, right? Of like Toni Morrison or others. And for you, it might just be like, you know what? I'm going to commit to maybe just like doing some like reading, some more reading or learning, or maybe listening to a TED talk about a certain experience of a certain community that I'm trying to engage with, right? But notice here, you're planning the action steps. It's not like or it might be more internal. It's not like external, I'm jumping in to like save the day. And so I think that's very, very critical as allies, is that you're kind of taking this reflective process and getting from awareness to action, y'all. For some issues or things that you're thinking about in the outdoors, it could immediately be like a one-day type of thing. Okay, I'm aware, I can follow, I can think about this. Or this could be like a 6-month process. It's like, I want to take the time to analyze my own actions and my own reflections. Do I have bias that I need to unpack and uncover, right? And then lastly is like the allyship. It's like, okay, now what can I do, or how can I hold myself accountable to ensuring that these barriers that I see, or these inequities that I see, don't exist, aren't perpetuated. And this might mean, this action and allyship are very tied together, right? It's like, this might mean, hey, I'm going to, reach out to an organization and see what like help that they need. Or I might like, go in and just do some more reading, or just donate to an organization. We're going to talk about some like actual like steps in allyship that I think are important, because I do want to like stop and pause and acknowledge, like, when you go from awareness to action, I think it's important to think about, right, your own experience, right, before just jumping in, especially with a community that may be different from your own experience, right? And so for me, it's like, now when I'm thinking about allyship, I'm thinking about like, even one idea I had is like, okay, I have the action steps. What steps can I take? Allyship and holding myself accountable is a lot of times like, I'm like, okay, for our summer camp, like, I don't need to be leading our night hikes like I did our first year. Like, why don't I just step back and make space, which we'll talk about at the end, for like some other like women of color to lead those things. Even though I'm like the most certified, I'm getting ready to finish my wilderness first responder certification. I've help guide people through Idaho and other places, right? I like, there's room that I need to have as an ally to make space, right? And give folks the resources to amplify folks so that they can see above that fence line. That makes sense. Okay. So I think thinking about this, taking from awareness to allyship, right? I want to push y'all to think about, before you're just jumping in and it's like, I want to join this program, or I want to help, or I want to lead. We get some of those emails, and I usually push back in a healthy way, in a very nice way, of like, well, wait a second, like, what do you know about our kids? What learning have you done about our community, right? What do you know about their experience, right? And it's not like feeling like a test or a gotcha. It's just more of an understanding that to be a true ally, you're continually, this is a cycle, going through this process of like, how are you aware, analyzing, what action steps can I take, then ensuring that those align to make sure that inequities aren't perpetuated or don't exist anymore. All right. So that's a little bit more of this framework from an author named Barbara Love that I wanted to share with y'all. All right. So when I think about this, I told y'all I would come back to this example of like what this might look like, right? So one big thing I know for our girls camp, our girls camp, which is predominantly all Black girls, is we think a lot about our young girls in hair, right? Hair is such an important part of like a lot of communities, right? But especially in the Black community, and especially for our Black girls, right? And a lot of times when we think about their experience, right, a lot of times their hair isn't accounted for. So one big example of what this might look like, right, is like, okay, I'm aware that hair is important for our Black girls, right? And then it's like analyzing, even from a programming, like if you're leading youth programming or just partnering with Black families, it's like, wait a second, this happened when we took our girls to a ropes course once. Like, they had helmets, and a lot of our girls had braids for camp, or had their hair done, and like the helmets like barely fit on our girls. Like, they weren't made for the type of hair that our girls have, right? And so it's like, wait a second, what are the resources? Is my program like equipped to make sure like our girls' hair feels valued? A big one is also swimming, right? I always tell this to summer camps, like if you're going to take girls into the water, right, you might need to give some of our Black girls a little bit more additional time to prepare their hair to go there, right? And I'm speaking this from like experience. I don't want to name I'm like an expert on like being a Black woman. Like I'm not a Black woman myself, but these are some of the things that I've learned as an ally, right? That I'm like, okay, wait a second, before we do our pool day, maybe we need extended time. I saw someone talked about like clearing out invasive species, right? And so it's like if you're like trying to engage and work with potentially a community, right, that is predominantly Black women, it's important to consider like, wait a second, I might not just throw them out. Like how do I make sure like they feel safe and valued, right? How do I make sure like their hair is potentially cared for? Or is there like, if I'm just giving out equipment or helmets, like, do I make sure like, hey, just to prepare that, or maybe it's just an email that I send out, hey, you're going to wear these helmets, so just be prepared. Because they're not all, but there's definitely some Black girls that really want to know that ahead of time, prepare their hair in a certain way. So if like, I know for some of our Black girls, if they know like, I'm going to be wearing helmets, right, they'll put their hair back in braids. So then it's a little easier to fit, right? And so that's like another action step you can take. And then that allyship comes along where you're giving those reflective practices of reflecting and thinking about, okay, did our girls feel safe, right? Did especially Black girls feel safe? So I just want to give you that example of like, hair is a perfect example that we see a lot of times at camps and youth programs and even family programs. That's like, oh, just throw kids like in the water. I heard one camp tell me, and I was just like, oh my gosh, they're like, we don't understand why the Black girls don't want to participate in our mud pit activity. And I was like, if that girl got to camp and she might have got her hair done, right, and done all these things to get to camp to make sure she looks nice, if she comes home and her hair has mud in it, there's going to be a problem, right? So she's probably holding back because she's like, I don't want to upset my family, right? So again, that awareness piece and analysis piece is important. And as an ally, as you reflect, you can think about, well, wait a second. What do I need to do to ensure these girls feel safe? Do we even continue the mud pit activity? Or if we continue it, maybe we let our families know, hey, this is what they're going to be participating in. Maybe we make it opt-in. Maybe we provide different options. There's a lot of different things you can do there, right? So providing that differentiation. All right. So that's a perfect example of what that looks like. The other big thing is just like thinking about like the stories and making you aware of different stories too. And I think like storytelling is super important of thinking about the experience for like different communities you're going to engage with. There's an amazing article that I'm going to share and follow up as part of y'all's playbook, right? I think that's the name of it, right, Mary? Playbook that I want to share with y'all and some guiding questions to consider, right? But there's an amazing article by this woman named Liberatory, and she wrote for Outside Magazine. She's written for ESPN, and she loves the outdoors. So as we go back to this, one big thing before, as I see y'all are reading this, I won't go back already. But as y'all read some of like her reflections, right? She talks about this idea. Another big piece of making yourself aware is not going in and also assuming on the other side. It's like, I'm coming in to save the day. Like these Black kids have never experienced nature before. We have girls that come to us that have been through Girl Scouts, that have been all over the country, that have been in national parks, or they grew up in rural communities where they are very deeply connected to the outdoors, right? One of our families this summer, they are driving an RV from New York to Texas and stopping along 4 national parks along the way before they drop their girl off to our summer camp, right? So that girl's going to have a different experience, right? She has a powerful experience. So for us, it's not going to be like an intro to nature for her, right? So this is important also as you think about allyship, is making yourself aware of the community around you, especially for some of y'all who are in like more rural areas, right? And like potentially like you may be engaging with communities of color who have years and years of ranching experience, farming experience, very deep connections to the outdoors, right? And so it's important, especially as master naturalists, to not assume either as an ally, right? And so as you can see her reflections, I love that second paragraph, y'all. If you cut me, my blood would be the color of the red clay hills my family has walked and worked for 4 generations, right? Such a beautiful thing. So she thinks about this idea that like outdoors is ingrained in me. So if you as a master naturalist engage with her and say, we're going to introduce you to nature, she's going to be like, psh, I've been like, my family's been in nature. I've lived on a farm. We've done all these things, right? And so like, that's an important piece to not assume as an ally also. And again, even for me as a male, right? Not to assume, oh, because she's a woman, like I have more experience in the outdoors. Like I met Liberatory. I now kind of call her a friend. And I'm like, she's telling me all this stuff about owls and birding. And I'm like, I have no idea. I'm taking copious notes, right? So it's very important to not assume, right? And I think it's important also to name that like some communities, yes, there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of inequities that communities experience, right? But also there's some power there. There's also some triumph too that we need to tap into. So not everything is like, there's definitely barriers, right? But there's also hope, right? And resiliency in a lot of communities. And it's important to tap into that. Now, at the same time, there's also experiences, right, that she's also had that are also traumatizing. And these also could be barriers to folks getting outdoors. So she had a very traumatic experience, right? She talks about she grew up in South Carolina, and as you can read, goes to this apple orchard, right? And people accuse her and her dad of stealing. Like, they have their own farm. Like, why would they steal apples when they have their own farm? They were just looking around, right? And like the fact that this group was willing to shoot her over apples. So these are also some traumatic experiences that Black folks face around violence in the outdoors too. I know for some of our kids, they feel scared to go to certain parks. So they're like, am I going to feel safe there, right? If they go out and they see like certain flags that signify very much like racist history, they're not going to feel safe. These are some of the things that our families, our kids fear. One of the biggest things I always have to push back against, y'all, like so much, is I do not like the idea when people are like, why doesn't everyone just get outdoors? Like, I get the root of that question, right? But there's sometimes some experiential barriers to the outdoors. I want to name, I'm not, Mary can attest, I'm not like, I did a TED Talk and I'm not like, listen to my TED Talk. Oh, I talk about this. I know some TED Talk people that do. I'm not like that. Just for the sake of time, in my TED Talk story, if it's something you want to tap into, I talk about the story of my grandmother, right? My grandfather had this beautiful experience and connection outdoors. My grandmother experienced sexual assault in the outdoors. So for her, like, she was terrified for me and my grandfather to ever go outdoors because she carried that trauma with her until the end of her life, right? So I share that to say it's important to think about these two pieces, right? This tragedy, this triumph, these two pieces when you're thinking about being an ally, to especially along lines of race and gender, right? To different communities, that there may be real like traumatic experiences that could be barriers, or resource barriers, right? Around like money, finances, gear. Those are the simple things that y'all know about, right? To getting outdoors. If a family's like, well, I can't afford to go camping, a tent is $150, right? Or $300. That's also another barrier, and that could prevent others from engaging in nature. All right, so we're coming to the end of the third quarter. I have other narratives from our kids that are super amazing, but for the sake of time, as much as I want to share, I'm going to push forward. But a lot of our kids definitely align to some of these experiences of tragedy and triumph, right? And for some of them, it's like their first experience getting outdoors. And like, really, when I think about getting outdoors, I think about like state parks and national parks. And then for others of our kids, they have a lot of experience and carry some of those things with them. All right, so let me pause. And I'm going to invite y'all into the chat real quick. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm right on schedule. I'm just going to kind of speed through these last few pieces, and we're going to end by talking about making space and taking space, all right? So drawing your world. I would love if y'all can look back at your notes and thinking about the Draw Your World activity. And I want to invite y'all to the chat. If you're open to sharing, if you don't feel free, you don't have to share everything or anything like that. But I would love for at least like a few folks to kind of get the chat active for a quick second. When you did that last Draw Your World activity, would some of y'all be open to sharing it via chat? Like, what were some of the things, the actual items that you drew? What were some of the items that you drew? Or what were some things that popped up in your list, right, when you were asked to draw your world? Oh, family, good. Trees. Yes. Trees, wildflowers. I mean, maybe this was like a psychology trick because I had trees right there, right? Ooh, survivor, interesting. My friends. Ooh, birds, yes. Garden in the view, garden, moons and stars. Again, the psychology trick. Scout troop, that's beautiful. Yeah. Ooh, hands joined together. That's great. Curly hair, family, friends. I see a lot of family. Good West Texas, trees. I'm seeing so much nature imagery, obviously, from the Master Naturalist, right? Community, rabbit, good. Awesome. That's so beautiful. Thank y'all for sharing some of that. Trees, Hawaii, sky. Ooh, okay. That's great. That's great. So some of y'all physically thought about the world. Some of y'all thought about like the intimate places you've been. Some of y'all thought about the world around you. I had y'all do that activity. Think about like the world that you experience, right, is one thing, but the world or experience of some communities of color may be so different. So this activity, one, I want to invite y'all as like, I'll use this as a tool later. We've used it in some of our programs. It's a fun way to get to know, especially kids or families, around like what they believe their world is. And it's really powerful to build on that, especially if they start using nature and imagery and things like that for y'all as master naturalists to engage with them and like build upon that. But they did this activity with a group of urban youth of color. I think in North Carolina, they did a whole study around it. And what was interesting was a majority of the youth of color, all right, the majority of the youth of color, when they were asked to draw their world, all they could draw was literally just their neighborhood. Just like literally just their neighborhood. They couldn't imagine anything outside of there. They also did this same activity with the same age of kids from groups from a more affluent community, around lines of class. In that community just happened to be predominantly white. And in that community, they saw that like those kids, I think they were like 8 years old, like drew a physical world, right? And were drawing and identifying different places and spaces. And a lot of it had nature imagery in it, right? So you're seeing like these two kids, same age, but along lines of potentially race and along lines of potentially class, their worlds are different. Their worlds are different, right? The worlds are different. So I think that's important. Like I want to start off with the activity and end with that. But thinking about understanding as an ally, your world may be different, right? And that's okay. And it's going to be your job to like build those bridges along action, awareness from your world to another. And not saying it's my job to have these kids see my world, right? It's your job to enter their world to better understand it, right? To better understand, especially youth and families that you want to engage with. All right, youth and families you want to engage with. All right, y'all. So we're at like the 10-yard line, right? We're winding down. We got like 2 minutes left. I know we're a little bit behind schedule. So I want to end with just a few kind of guiding questions that I want to talk about. All right. So as I mentioned, I think this is very important for y'all to consider. And as a takeaway is like, to what extent are you learning about BIPOC communities, right? What might be some of the barriers that they face? And that could be a part of the awareness piece. It's just sitting down and listening or talking about the outdoors with people. There's an amazing book in follow-up. I'll send a link to it called Black Faces, White Spaces. We just had an opportunity to talk with the author, Dr. Caroline Finney, and she asked this question to a lot of her students who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. She doesn't ask them, what has been your favorite experiences in nature? She just asks them, what is nature or what is the environment, right? And that gives a door opening to them to understanding what their experiences have been. Because what she's found is some have had great experiences. Some will be like, oh, well, when I think about the environment, it's such an easy entry point. They're like, I think about my grandfather or grandma's garden, right? And then that's a great opportunity to learn what might have been some entry points to nature. So that's the first question I want to leave you with. Oh, someone asked me, what is the camp council? Okay, I'll answer that. And then this is important, making space and taking space. Okay, so when we say making space and taking space, we're right here at the end. When we say making space, like how are you potentially stepping back? I named that example that I talked about. As much as I love night hiking and leading kids on night hikes, it's one of my favorite activities. It's very important that you might need to step back to make space for other leaders so kids can see themselves. Like a lot of times kids don't even see themselves in these spaces. So when we think about that idea of making space as an ally is taking a step back and eventually providing resources to other communities, right? And other leaders for them to go out and do the thing. So as a master naturalist, this might mean, hey, maybe I'll just go to the Boys and Girls Club instead of going to them and being like, I want to lead this programming. What if I went to some of their leadership and said, hey, I went to this cool training. Do y'all want to know a little bit about some of the plants in your area? So then y'all can go and lead and do the thing. That's very important. And sometimes making spaces as simply as, you know what, I love this organization, but it's important that I just donate some money to them. And if they need me, that's great. But providing options. I think one thing that always breaks my heart is like for me, is when we get emails for Black Outside, great people that come to us, but then they're like, we want to come and lead programming. And I'm like, I get it. You're super excited about this, but like our kids don't see people that look like them doing this that much. So we ask that you kindly make space. So like if there's resources that you have or lessons that you have, share those with us. We have plenty of volunteers that can lead that. We just will hope to be a knowledge sharing network, not for having folks just come in and just lead right away, right? So that's a thing of making space there. And then lastly, taking space, y'all. This is the time that I think it's important, especially when potentially BIPOC folks aren't in the room. Sorry, there's an extra C there. How are you taking up space to advocate for community? So I definitely think it's important as an ally to step up, right? to step up and take space sometimes and be like, wait a second, we're not considering this community, or we're not considering this demographic along lines of race, or it could be along lines of class. Wait a second, what about these kids with this activities? I think so much about this. One quick example of this, when we name trails. Y'all, let's be real. Tell me how many trails you've been on that are named after Black folks, right? And that's not a trick question, but I can only name like one or two, right, in Texas state parks that are named after Black folks. And so like that's one example of taking space. If you're in a place where you're like, oh, we're naming this, or thinking about names and places, it's important to take space to advocate for BIPOC communities, right? BIPOC communities. One other last quick thing I'll leave with, I know we're a little over time, so thank y'all for your grace in that. I just want to leave you with is also, I didn't put a slide on this, but y'all, we know how much gear is important to getting outdoors. Please make sure you are a conscious consumer. There are some brands that are doing an amazing job amplifying like BIPOC voices, BIPOC perspectives. There are other brands that are not doing a good job. Scroll down their Instagram feed and you'll quickly be able to figure that out. So I definitely push a lot of people, a lot of outdoor folks to really think consciously about who they're purchasing products from, right? As they engage with the outdoors, right? Because that's very important, that there are organizations and groups that support like a lot of the work that groups like Black Outside are doing, and Latino Outdoors and other organizations. And there are others that are just, you know, they're good brands, right? But they haven't taken that step. So that's another quick thing there. I'll leave you with this last fun picture of us. Like this picture is so powerful to me. Thinking about even making space myself. This person who's putting on this headlamp, this was his first time putting on a headlamp himself and going on a night hike, right? And instead of me doing everything and teaching him everything, I was trying to make space for him, right, to do this himself. So it was really great that he brought some of his students, and he's now a volunteer with us, to participate in a night hike with us. And he was the one that was able to lead and do these with kids. So we're a little over time. I thank y'all for your grace. And if you've stayed on, I know some of y'all had to hop off a little early, but I appreciate y'all. And I now want to go ahead and unshare my screen. And if it's okay with Mary, I could stay on for a little bit to answer any questions that you might have. I think I saw some stuff pop up in the chat.
There were a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see. So you talked a little bit about making space, and you gave one example of organizations, not of organizations. What are I guess so that we are aware, what are other ways of taking space and not making space that you have seen?
I'll be honest, y'all. I'll be real with y'all. This summer, listen, some brands got called out on social media. Like, and like people named, they're like, I love this brand. And it was out of love. It's like, hey, I love this specific brand. Like, hey, I noticed that I scroll down your media feed, y'all have 500,000 followers. Why do you not have anyone that is of a different race? Or have diversity in your models, right? So that's one way of taking space too, is just, I think social media is like a great avenue for that. I mean, I think there's a lot of like yelling and angriness at social media. I feel like sometimes everyone's just yelling at each other, but I think there are conscious ways to do that. Similarly, I also think with like localized like outdoor programs and things like that, also taking the space to advocate and say, well, wait a second, are there ways to bring in more diversity along lines of race, class, and especially gender in leadership? So that's some ways I've seen other folks take space, is like inviting folks in, inviting folks that they know. And I always say it's better to call in than call out sometimes. There's times you need to call out, but definitely calling in, especially folks that might be in your local community, to say, hey, I've noticed over the past 15 years, like this troop lead, we haven't had many kids that are like youth of color. How can we at least, like, we're not going to fix that right away, but is there something we can do together to work together to solve that? And that's a great way of taking space.
That kind of leads to one of the questions I'm going to pull out from the chat too, is how do I invite people, or what's the best way to do that? You just explained one way, the calling in, but what are some other opportunities there?
Yeah, to invite people into kind of like this discussion. So, I think I'm going to kind of answer this on the spot. I think one big thing is just like also just aligning on terms, what I talked about. Like one big term we hear is justice, right? And I'll never forget, I spoke with someone who was like not Newark organization, but an outdoor colleague. came from a totally different perspective, very rural community, had never, I mean, he told me straight up, he's like, you're one of the few Black people I even know, right? And so when I said justice to him, he thought something totally different than what I was talking about. Like when I say justice, I'm thinking about just providing the resources and removing barriers to different communities. When he said justice, he's like, oh, people are going out and they're protesting and they're getting ready to tear stuff up and like all that stuff. And I was like, okay, let's slow down. Like that is potentially a justice action, right? But this is what I mean. So I think it's important when we're taking space to just align on terms, right? And as you're inviting people in, say, hey, when I think about this from equity, wait a second, this is what I mean when I say equity, right? Because a lot of important piece to consider is like, our end goal is equality, right? But in order to get to equality, because people haven't been necessarily treated equally, we have to use an equity approach. You get what I'm saying? So we can't just like, oh, treat everyone equally the same, give everyone the same box, because as that graphic shared, there's like definitely barriers to people seeing the same field. So we have to think from an equity approach. So I think the sharing of terms is important, and diversity is another big one too that we think about. Some people are kind of afraid of that word, and it's okay to like lean into that word and be like, hey, I'm thinking about diversity along lines of race, or I might be thinking about diversity. I know for us, we think about it along lines of class too. So that's also important.
One of the questions in the chat was, what was your why or how in getting started as a camp counselor?
Yeah. And then I see some other great questions about safety for adults of color. So I'll try to like tie in the two. So I had a unique experience. I worked at a 7-week sports camp. So we had the kids for 7 weeks, y'all. 7 weeks. So I see some people are like, whoa, love my experience in all boys sports camp, 7 weeks. You can imagine it was almost, yeah, right. Bless us. Yeah. It was like Lord of the Flies by the end of that. But I had a unique camp experience that because it was a sports camp, our camp director was very intentional about, he really had this big vision for like, our camp was predominantly white, but he really wanted more diversity in his camp counseling staff. So he went to like campuses, a lot of Division III, Division II schools, and recruited athletes. And so about 40 to 50% of our counselors identified as BIPOC. So it was a fun experience, like engaging across lines of difference for our kids. We had counselors from Africa that were basketball players. We had counselors from Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago that were soccer instructors. And so for our kids, it was a fun exercise as a youth to learn how to work across lines of difference with counselors and with kids and for us. So I learned a lot. I was like, oh, wow, you've had this unique experience that I've never had. And a lot of my kids taught me so much about the outdoors because they had the privilege of experiencing so many things that I hadn't experienced outside of my grandfather's garden and a few local hikes that I had done in high school. So that's super important. And then if it's okay, Michelle, I want to answer this question about making it safe for adults of color. I think it's just important to like, starting off by just listening, that awareness piece, and knowing that like, I want to push y'all to say you're not going to solve that issue like overnight. And so when you think about safety, some things I think about is, again, like one like practical small step is like before an outdoor activity, especially for master naturalists, if you're like doing, actually, let me back up and give a perfect example. Some people email us and they email us right away. They're like, hey, can you participate in this park cleanup? And I'm like, yes, of course we want to be stewards of the environment. We follow and leave no trace practices when we go to camps and things like that. But I always push back and say, if our kid has never been to that park, I don't want their first experience to be picking up stuff at the park. Like, you know what I mean? Like that, like that's not like they need to understand the why. Like, let them build a relationship. Let that park be a part of the world that they draw, right? So that's an important piece to think about safety, right? It's like, wait a second, like what is their first entry point? And then also just as much framing as you can give too. It's like, okay, we're going to this state park, right? I even told one group this recently. I said, okay, your campsite is way out in the country and you're emailing a bunch of teachers of color to come out. You need to tell them, hey, we know these 2 places are great places you could stop for gas. Like, not that the other places are bad, but we know the owners, and here's some safe places to stop on your way out if you need to, right? And then when you come, here's how we're going to welcome you in. So I think that's like super important also to like think about safety, is giving as much framing and context as possible. Because a lot of times us outdoor folks get so excited. It's like, just meet us at Lockhart State Park, right? But if you're coming from like deep Eastside Austin, you're like, well, wait a second, what's out there? I don't know. I've never been to all these places, right? And so that's important too, to provide framing for safety. And then as much as you can, just asking in a healthy way. If you have BIPOC friends, I want to advocate, please don't like wear them out with questions, right? But like doing just some listening and learning and just asking open-ended questions. Hey, what has been your nature experience? Or like, what is nature to you? right? Or when are some times you felt safe in the outdoors? And I think a lot of times friends, colleagues, other organizations can provide some great answers.
I know you've, Alex, I want to give you an opportunity to answer whatever questions catch your eye in there, because I don't want to pick and choose which ones to moderate for you.
No, that's awesome. Does a dictionary term for these terms exist? Yes and no. I mean, yes, it's definitely like equity has a certain like Webster's definition. We think about Webster. So, I mean, let's be real here. I think like when we think about equity in the United States, that word is like, there's a lot of stuff attached to that we have to think about, like equity. And one of my friends leads a Black women's hiking group in the UK. So when she says equity, some of the barriers that they experience in the United Kingdom are different than the ones in the United States. So that's why I kind of broaden that definition to think about context. And even here, right, over 90% of the land here in Texas is private, right? I have a friend that runs an organization in California, Outdoor Outreach. Awesome organization, San Diego. Check their website out. They're so cool. They take kids surfing from San Diego and climbing, do all the fun stuff. But like from an equity lens, like equity in Texas, thinking about land access is totally different than it is in California because they have so much public land. I don't know if you know this, every single beach in California for the most part is public. Like it's required to be public access. You have to go through so many loopholes to privatize a beach, right? Whereas here in Texas, you know, a lot of our land is private. So we have to navigate things a lot differently to get our kids out to spaces and places. So that's one example of like the terms and the definitions there. And then the other piece that I saw, how do I include without imposing or cause the person to be singled out? I love that. Like, yeah, like if you're leading a program, I'm always thinking from the youth, but even if you're engaging with families, you don't want to like single out and be like, hey, like, here's these swim caps just for you, right? Like in front of everyone. So I always believe, like, when we think about that word inclusion, just providing options, right? You know, and even along the lines of inclusion along different body sizes and things like that, right? So, like, if you're kayaking with a group, right? It's like naming, like, okay, we're gonna make sure ahead of time we have kayaks that everyone can be on and don't capsize potentially, or if someone is of a different size, they feel comfortable on. So then, from there, you're empowering, right, them with the decision to be like, hey, here's all the kayaks. Which one do you want to gravitate towards, right? And so I really want to push sometimes. You don't want to impose, but I love the idea of just giving folks options and agency over their decisions in engaging in the outdoors too. Because you may have girls like, again, especially like I think about young Black girls, they're like, whatever, I don't care about getting mud in my hair, right? But during the activity, you might provide it for every kid, right? Thinking about that word centering. Hey, y'all, if you don't want your hair to get like messed up, we have these caps or we have these hats for you when we do this activity, right? And so then everyone's being involved, and it's not just imposing or singling out potentially the one young girl of color or the one kid that may feel like ostracized based off that. I think I did a good job of answering that. What about
Alex? A lot of what you just said sparked a lot of that is intentional planning.
Yes.
It's intentionally thinking through all of your potential audience members, all of the different factors, and it's taking that process of awareness and factoring in and considering and being open and sharing resources and sharing, just over communicating all of your plans or options that are available for anyone who wants to participate with you.
Yes, Mary, you're speaking it. Yes, that's it. Preaching over there. So that's great. That's exactly what it is, right? Providing like as many options, and also, like I said, the over planning, like you want to almost over communicate a lot of times, especially with like, you know, potentially first time state park visitors or first time visits to a certain ranch, right? Like, here's all the information you need so they feel comfortable versus just assuming, oh, well, it's a ranch. It's beautiful. Here's some beautiful pictures. They'll have fun, right? It's very important to like provide as much detail as possible. What about presenting, inviting participation with self? I think I kind of get what you're saying there, Kim, but I'll try to answer that. What about presenting / inviting participation with self-identified community groups? Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, like outdoor Afro and things like that. If there's certain things you want to invite them to, I mean, I think do that, and just providing the invitation also with different options. It's like, hey, you know, sometimes people come to us, hey, can you send these 5 kids to camp? And I'm like, we have our own camp. Like, that's not our job to like send kids to your camp, right? But I think the key thing for you as you invite folks in is figuring out values alignment. So one big thing I would push you to do as you work with different community groups is building the trust ahead of time. So I always ask the question, even for us, with like, we partner with the Eastside Boys and Girls Club here to recruit some of our kids. And before we even recruited kids, I asked like the director, I'm like, what's your vision for these like kids? Like, what are your hopes and desires and vision for these kids in the next 5 years? Like, what does your programming look like? I shadowed their programming for 2 hours, got a chance to like see what they do. And then I was like, hey, we have this summer camp opportunity. And the director was like, this aligns to what we want. We want more nature inclusion. So I would really push to make space for listening and make space to learn and building that, I call it trust capital. So then when you make that ask, it's not like, who is this random person asking me to send a bunch of kids or families out to this thing? Like, we're not doing that, right? Versus like, oh, wait, I know Mary, I know Michelle, great, I know Kim, like, they're great. So like, okay, great, we have a lot of trust there, so we feel comfortable partnering together. So I think a true partnership is important to have that trust as the baseline for anything. All right.
Alex,
Yep, go ahead.
will you talk on, I know you have mentioned it earlier in your presentation that you have some resources that you're going to share. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. When Alex shares those resources with us folks, we're going to post those to our website. We're also recording today's event. If y'all haven't seen that up in the top part of your screen, we are recording and we'll be posting that to our website later this afternoon as well. So hopefully we'll have all those resources ready to share by late this afternoon, early tomorrow morning.
Absolutely. So as follow-up real quick, what you'll receive, I'll send you a link to Latrey's article. It's a beautiful article in Outside Magazine. I'll also send you a link to the podcast that we did with Dr. Caroline Finney. Oh, she was dropping so much knowledge about her experience in the outdoors. She wrote Black Faces, White Spaces. And then some of y'all asking about Black Outside. Yes, we are a 501c3 organization, nonprofit. So if you're moved after this presentation to donate, right, definitely feel free to do that. Yeah, we are a 501c3. We also partner with Texas's and America's first Black-owned outdoor store called Slim Pickens Outfitters. It's in Stevensville, Texas. So if you go on our website and click on merch shop, there's ways to also support Black Outside by like purchasing awesome shirts like this one. We have an owl shirt that's dedicated to Harriet Tubman, and proceeds go to our organization. So that's another fun way to get involved with us. Thank you, Rachel, for acknowledging also around different ability levels and deafness. I think that's more of a Mary Michelle question around real-time caption linking. So thank you for lifting that up.
And Alex, I think maybe one parting question for you.
Yes.
As we kind of wrap up today, how can we keep this conversation going and being allies with you, your organization, and other organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're big on social media, Black Outside. So I do want to name, like, definitely give us a follow. Shameless plug. But I say that really, like, honestly, like, it's so cool for our kids when they go on. Our Instagram has over 9,000 followers. So like when they go on there, they're like, whoa, like over 9,000 people saw this, right? Or saw us on the Instagram. And it means a lot to our kids that they like know that there's communities of people that from all races, classes that like love and support what they're doing and that they're not alone doing this. So definitely, I think following organizations like ours, Black Outside, I think here in Texas, Outdoor Afro is another national organization. They have a chapter in Austin, and I think Houston is an emerging chapter. Latino Outdoors, another amazing organization. They have a chapter in Austin, and they're like organizations to just follow and support. I think that's important. And then just like I said, I think just like making space, doing the reading, spending the time to reflect and thinking about like, what's your world? What's been your personal experience? How is that similar potentially to some folks? And how is it different? And taking the time to listen and making space to listen. So those will be some big pieces. And then, if you're moved and an organization does reach out and wants to get you involved, definitely take that opportunity when it presents itself. Yes, Melanin Basecamp is perfect. They're going to. One other small shameless plug to another awesome follow, She Colors Nature. She is amazing. She's actually a supporter of Black Outside based in Seattle, but She Colors Nature is a really awesome follow, and she provides a lot of great content and stuff like that around just different perspectives on the outdoors. So, yes.
Alex, thank you so much for your presentation today. Absolutely. It was incredible. There were so many great questions and resources, and I'm going to have to spend a lot more time digesting the awareness to allyship circle. Right. There's so much in that one single slide. And with that, Michelle, just thank you both for so much for helping. Alex, thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom. There was quite a lot of calls to invite you to our Master Naturalist annual meeting.
Okay.
So I will be sharing that link with you afterwards.
Okay.
We have an annual event for those on the call as well. The Master Naturalist annual meeting is held in mid to late October, October 21st through the 24th. It's 3 days of fellowship and training and lots of fun. There's always a good time had at the Master Naturalist Annual Conference. So I'll be sharing that in the chat here shortly, and hope you can join us, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to. I'd love to. October's a fun time and the weather's so perfect here in Texas. So, yes, great. Yeah, just let me know. Well, hey, thank y'all so much for giving me the gift of y'all's time, y'all's space, your perspective, your questions. I really feel honored. And thank you for accepting that invitation to draw your world alongside us. And yeah, definitely give us a follow on Black Outside to kind of see our journey. So we're getting ready to take kids to Cape Rock Canyon State Park in June. So definitely send us light for a safe and fun trip, and that our kids don't freak out too much when they see that first bison there at the park. So yeah, thank you.
That's going to be so much fun.
Thank you for being with us today and accepting our invitation to speak with our group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right.
Kathy said, don't pet the bison.
Oh yeah, we